This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
What are you singing?
I was singing One Nation Under a Groove by Funkadelic.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Great way to start an episode. Welcome back, folks. This is Dream Idiots.
Yes. Yes, it is Dream Idiots, as you can probably tell by our introduction. My name is Morris, and that other fellow is Bryan. Each week, we bring stories to each other and bring you along for the ride. And we've gotten some great responses from last week's episode with Maggie, special guest genius, and our first guest genius, Maggie Kent. So thanks for that. I am guessing Maggie is sharing that episode as well. I have not checked her blog in a few days, so I don't know, but hopefully she's sharing that. And we're trucking right along here in late summer.
Yeah, I need to reach out to her and see if she's gotten some more, had a pickup in readership on her blog. But that was a ton of fun. Thanks again to Maggie for joining us, and thanks to you guys. You can check us out on every single platform out there. You're listening to us on one of them. If you can give us 5 stars and shoot us a review, that'd be great. If you wanted to, someone wrote in or gave the suggestion that we should really encourage folks to write in with story ideas. If you have random funny things in your neck of the woods that may not quite get as much press or may not be as well known as other things that you think are would be worth having us delve into, we would happily take those suggestions. You can check us out on dreamidiots.com. We've got a bunch of new merch on there. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Dream Idiots. And if you want to drop us a line, email is dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, indeed. Are we ready to start, or do we have any other announcements?
One other announcement. We've mentioned this in passing before. We started a meetup group for podcasters many moons ago. Well, it's one in the past year. That group has now evolved into something called the Central Texas Podcast Collaborative. If you're in the area and you're into podcasting, you can go on Facebook and find that group. There's a Facebook group page for it. Next event for that group is September 13th at Nelco Comics here in San Antonio. And then we have a special guest coming in for that group, the guy who founded the Podfest Expo that's held in January in Orlando. He's going to be in town, and there's going to be another event with the collaborative on October 1st, probably at the same venue, probably also at Nelco Comics. So if you're in the area and want to swing by and learn about podcasting and meet some folks, please do so. And check out the Facebook page.
Oh, that is awesome. Yes, please do that. I probably won't be able to make that meeting this time around. It seems I have to travel from the Denver area. I probably won't make it down there, but it sounds like it's going to be awesome and super fun. And big props to Nelco Comics for letting us hold it there again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That is great. I'm distracted by my dogs barking at something upstairs, but they bark at everything. So, we ready to start, Bryan?
We are good to go.
Episode 124. I get to start first. Bryan, I'm going to start by telling you about a guy named Joseph Rubinstein.
Joseph Rubinstein. No idea.
He set out for America to build a better life in 1898 at the age of 27. He had a few hurdles to overcome first. The biggest one was his conscription into the Russian army as a Polish Jew.
Not
that
fun.
Sounds rough. Yes. The second was his arranged marriage to Fanny Rutkowski, which was difficult at best. They already had 2 children together. Joseph also had a bit of a drinking problem, which I can hardly blame him for, given that his stint in the Russian army would most likely end in a horrible, horrible death. So he deserted, which is a very brave thing to do from the Russian army. And he headed to America, but first he had pit stops in England and Canada, almost like he was, kind of slipping into a cold pool just to get to America. Um, but he landed in Chicago in 1903, and he found work in a carpenters union and settled into a nice Jewish neighborhood. Fanny and the two kids joined him in 1905, so he had a blissful 7 years as a bachelor. As I mentioned, the Rubensteins had a tumultuous marriage, hampered by Joseph's drinking and often violent temper, and Fanny's emerging mental instability. Now, they did excel at one thing together, and that's making babies. They added 7 more to their total in Chicago. 8 of their 9 children would live into adulthood, which is an astonishing to me. That's fantastic. They did have a girl who died as an infant in something called a scalding accident. So I imagine that was a horrible, awful death for that poor girl. But they were evenly divided with 4 girls, Eva, Eileen, Anne, and Marion, and 4 boys. I'm not sure of the age order of the girls, but this is the age order from eldest to youngest for the boys. Hyman, Jacob, Sam, and Earl. So the names definitely got more Americanized as you went down, went down the row. Joseph and Fanny lived apart most of the time, with the younger kids rotating between home and the foster care system, which can't have been great in the 19 teens.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Eldest child Hyman left home as soon as he could. Now, for his part, the eldest boy left. Oh, I'm sorry. For his part, Joseph lived in an apartment close to his wife. He had a roommate, and that roommate was a homemade gin still, where he churned out lots and lots of gin. Sons Jacob and Earl would often stop by their dad's place with fresh cherries to, quote, give the gin some color. Fanny, while her errant husband was making and drinking gin, descended into psychosis. She believed for years that she had a fish bone lodged in her throat.
Okay.
No amount of medical attention, up to and including surgery to remove this bone, which didn't exist, would convince her otherwise. She was extremely mentally ill. Fanny frequently beat the children, who were often left to their own devices. Jacob, the eldest boy left there in the house, in particular had issues of truancy severe enough to get the notice of the Chicago Children's Court. And that tells me that he must have been really truant if you can get the attention of the Children's Court in, again, the 19 teens in Chicago.
Right.
He was sent along with all of the younger siblings into the foster care system off and on for about 5 years. Okay, so these kids had it rough. Neither mom and dad was particularly stable or reliable. So they did a lot of raising on their own. Now, eldest brother Hyman returned to the fold after moving out years prior in an effort to bring a little bit of stability to his younger siblings. That seemed to have helped somewhat. But for younger brother Jacob didn't really care about stability. What he wanted was a job. So he quit school officially at the age of 16. His learning probably petered out years earlier in the 8th grade when his truancy started. He was bootlegging fireworks from a nearby town into Chicago and selling them at a profit at the age of 9. By 17, he was scalping tickets to sporting events. I mean, you're looking at Chicago in the 19 teens. So you got the Cubs, you got the White Sox, the Bears are coming up. So you've got all kinds of stuff that you can scalp to. He did hold some legitimate jobs, but was most likely exposed to quite a bit of organized crime at the time. One legend suggests that he and a buddy from his street delivered packages for Al Capone as courier boys. That buddy later denied the Capone story. His name was Beryl Rosofsky.
No idea.
Beryl, which I always assumed was a woman's name.
It was a woman's name, yeah.
But Beryl Rosofsky would later box professionally under the name Barney Ross. He finished his boxing career 32-1-2. And he won championships in the lightweight, light welterweight, and welterweight divisions, which is pretty damned impressive. Great record, and to hold belts like that in 3 different weight divisions. Barney and Jacob would remain lifelong friends. Like his friend Barney, Jacob also got into fights, a lot of fights, up to 3 a week by some accounts. This is one thing that would never change about him. He fought for many reasons. Sometimes it was just plain old business, someone moving into his territory. Other times it was in defense of the president. Jacob admired Franklin Delano Roosevelt and took insults to him and his New Deal policies very personally. He stuck up for minorities, once trading blows with a group of college boys who had insulted an African-American musician. But more often than not, he got into fights because some people didn't like the fact that he was Jewish. Like many of his faith, he endured a litany of slurs from the Gentiles, so he fought. Then the Great Depression hit. And during the Great Depression, Jacob, like many Americans, headed west in search of work. He spent some time in Los Angeles, working as a singing waiter in an Italian restaurant. There's only one problem with this, Bryan. He was a lousy singer. May have been a good waiter, don't know that, but he for sure was a lousy singer.
Couldn't carry a tune. Okay.
So he had carry your tune, but not your. He headed up the coast to San Francisco, and he found work there, both legitimate in selling newspaper subscriptions and laying linoleum. So he would do anything he could to get ahead, to make a buck. Right. And he also had illegitimate means by again scalping tickets. That was his old standby. Jacob reunited here with his sister Eva, who had headed to California in 1934. She had been married but is now divorced, so the siblings shared an apartment with Eva's son for 2 years. Jacob's time in California also spurred heartache for him for the rest of his life because he met and fell in love with an actress named Virginia Belasco. But the relationship ultimately came to nothing. Years later, he would call Virginia the only woman I ever loved. Jacob left San Francisco and returned to the Chicago area in 1937, where he developed a new hobby. Can you guess what that hobby is, Bryan?
Back in Chicago. What year is this?
1937.
1937.
It's a cool hobby. It's a really cool hobby.
Oh, I was gonna guess, something related to organized crime or making booze, but
no, Bryan, he liked to beat up fascists.
Oh, I could stand behind that. Yeah.
By the age of 26, Jacob and some of his friends would allegedly sneak into the German-American Bund meetings in the Chicago area and just wreak havoc. The biggest of these incursions took place just before the horrifying Kristallnacht in 1938. Jacob and his Bund-busting pals used a local reporter named Herb Bryn to infiltrate a couple of rallies. Bryn, just as Jewish as Jacob and his pals, could easily pass as Aryan. So I'm guessing he was just a blonde-eyed, blue-haired fella. The group managed to break up not only a Bund meeting that night, but also one held by the Silver Legion. You ever heard of these guys?
No.
Sounds horrifying, doesn't it? This was an American fascist pro-Nazi organization formed by a real piece of shit named William Dudley Pelley in 1933. Homegrown American Nazis. Even Barney Ross helped out, although he was worried that owing to his career as a professional fighter, he might get charged with attempted murder rather than simple assault if he were arrested. So it's the old "my hands are lethal weapons" defense,
right.
As we saw in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Jacob solved this problem by telling Barney to not use his hands, so he handed his friend a blackjack instead. Elegant solution to a difficult problem. Oh, there's a lethal weapon. Here's a weapon. Jacob and his brothers, all three of them, and sometimes his sister Eva, often went into business together. An early venture saw the siblings create Pearl Harbor remembrance merchandise after the December 7th, 1941 attack. Jacob was a real nitpicker about the style of said merchandise, and by the time he was satisfied with the product, the market had become flooded with similar trinkets. He waited too long. So, Bryan, Jacob had grown up in Chicago, spent time in California, returned to Chicago. Where would the next stop be for a young Jewish entrepreneur?
See, I would think New York.
New York? Right. Maybe Florida. I don't know what Florida was like. Maybe. But New York seems likely, right?
Yeah. Baltimore.
No, maybe. Now, if you answered Texas, you win. Jacob and his siblings, Sam, Earl, and Eva, settled in Dallas, where the local Jewish population attended synagogue at Temple Emmanuel and Sherith Israel. I apologize if I didn't pronounce those correctly. Despite the conservative environs, Jacob remained a staunch Democrat, supporting Truman and later Kennedy with the same fervor he had supported FDR. Jacob desperately wanted to set up shop in Dallas as a mover and a shaker, in the industry where young women moved and shook for money, the nightclub business. And his exploits as a nightclub owner were legendary. He often acted as his own bouncer, or houseman, as the term was back then. He still liked to fight and had no problem tossing drunk patrons out the door, down the stairs, and into the street. Any Lothario pawing at the women in the stable of his dancers received pretty rough treatment, up to and including being pistol whipped.
Good.
So he didn't mess around.
It's a victimless crime. Come on.
Jacob moved in somewhat suspicious circles during his time in Dallas. Rumors of mob connections still dogged him after all these years. He tried to curry favor with the police department and local newspapers, bringing coffee and sandwiches to officers and reporters alike. He would just show up at the courthouse or at the police station or at the publisher, at the newspaper, and just have donuts, sandwiches, coffees for them. Some members of the Dallas Police Department hung out in Jacob's establishment as well, suggesting a favored status for the entrepreneur from Chicago. Jacob wanted to be indispensable to his adopted town. He wanted to be known as the mayor of downtown Dallas. People knew him, but didn't always like him. His primary rivals in the nightclub scene were a pair of brothers, fellow Jews, named Abe and Barney Weinstein. Abe couldn't abide Jacob, describing him as, quote, a kind of Jekyll and Hyde, and more directly, a real jerk. Perhaps more tellingly, Abe Weinstein didn't like Jacob's business model. My club was a nightclub, Abe said. His was just a joint. I had big names. He had nobody. That might be unfair to Jacob. In addition to his strip club, he owned 2 country and western music halls at one point, like the Silver Spur, where Hank Williams and Tennessee Ernie Ford played. Jacob was one of the few nightclub owners left who would still give Hank Williams a fair shake. Because remember, Williams would be dead by 51 because he was just a chronic alcoholic. Because at this point, his reputation for drinking instead of singing preceded him. One rumor persisted that when Williams would pass out while performing, Jacob would haul him backstage, sit his comatose body upright, and charge patrons for photos next to the unconscious singer. The Hawks, the backing group for Ronnie Hawkins that would rename itself The Band, one of your favorite groups, one of the best-loved rock bands of the 60s and 70s, dealt with Jacob Rubinstein once. Band member Robbie Robertson, rip Robbie Robertson, recalls meeting him while playing a crazy week-long gig at the Skyline Lounge. Robertson said, there was no roof. A fire had burned it up, and the owner either had decided to go with it or couldn't afford to fix it. The club employed a one-armed go-go dancer to entice people to get up and dance. A tussle broke out in the middle of the dance floor. One of the guys shot tear gas at the other guy from a very close range. The man clutched his face and crumpled immediately. Everyone shrieked and ran from the dance floor. Rubinstein caught up with the musicians after the show. Boys, he said, this building ain't exactly secure enough for you to leave your musical instruments unattended. If I were you, I'd stay here and guard them. So they did, foregoing the comfort of a hotel. I picture Ronnie Hawkins just being like, all right, see you guys. And he bounces for the hotel. Now, Abe Weinstein's brother, Barney, had nicer things to say about Jacob. Quote, he had a wonderful heart, Barney recalled. When he hardly knew me, he read about my mother's funeral in the newspaper, and he came to it. Jacob once offered to act as Barney's houseman one evening when the regular guy failed to show. But he said, I appreciate it, Jacob, but I think we're good, because he knew that Jacob would cause more problems than he solved with unruly patrons. One young comedian saw firsthand Jacob's erratic and volatile temper. Gabe Kaplan, future star of the 1970s TV show Welcome Back, Kotter, was in his late teens when Jacob offered him a 10-minute spot warming up the audience at a club. When they first met, Jacob seemed friendly enough. But during his set, Kaplan told a joke about a vampire who got distracted while ogling a woman's breasts. The punchline was that he was paying too much attention to her neck. Kaplan used the word tits in his routine, and Jacob lost his mind, insulted that anyone would use the word tits in his strip club. Kaplan apologized, and Jacob eventually calmed down, promising the young comedian he'd call if there's ever an open slot. Later in the week, the two men crossed paths at a poker game. Jacob had tracked Kaplan down there and gave him a peace offering, a plastic Dracula mask. It should be clear by now that Jacob Rubinstein walked a tightrope of legality in his business dealings and personal behavior. He slipped off that tightrope when he finally went too far for even his buddies in the Dallas Police Department. Jacob shot and mortally wounded an unarmed man in front of eyewitnesses. No one could save him from punishment this time. As he was tackled to the ground, Jacob could not believe that his friends were doing this to him. He was buddies with cops, civilians, and everyone in between. He was everybody's friend, everybody's pal. He was the mayor of downtown Dallas. You all know me, he cried out. I'm Jacob Rubenstein. He said that from the pavement on his, on his back, except he didn't say that exactly. Instead, he used the name he had adopted in 1947 to better suit a Gentile city like Dallas. You all know me, he cried out. I'm Jack Ruby.
Oh, shoot.
And that is the story of Joseph Rubenstein's time in Dallas as a businessman. The sources for this, Danny Fingerroth's excellent 2023 Jack Ruby, The Many Faces of Oswald's Assassin. If you have any interest in this subject, pick it up. It's from Chicago Review Press Incorporated from Chicago. Again, that's Danny Fingerroth's 2023 book, Jack Ruby, The Many Faces of Oswald's Assassin. And Wikipedia for a few basic names and dates.
Yeah, very cool. I had no idea that Jack Ruby wasn't Jack Ruby.
Nope. And multifaceted dude, apparently, from beating up Nazis to
beating up Nazis. Yeah, I'm all for that. That's a great start. But
beating up college kids who are harassing an African American musician. That's awesome. Importing fireworks at the age of 9. That's fantastic.
Good dude.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that.
You bet. Been wanting to do that one for a while.
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
All right.
All right. Here we
What's
go.
up
Here we
next?
go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Ready for a curse word?
I am always ready for a curse word.
Curse word this week is stiff rump. STIFFRUMP. Stiff rump. Are you a stiff rump? Do you enjoy a stiff rump? Have any idea what it is?
I assume this has nothing to do with a steakhouse.
It's nothing to do with the steakhouse. So stiff rump sounds like it might be dirty. It's actually not. But 18th century England, a stiff rump is an obstinate, disdainful individual who refuses to budge when action is needed. Can also apply to someone who has a baseless viewpoint and is being stubborn in their position, sort of like a mule. So I wonder if stubborn like a mule, stiff rump. I don't know. Maybe those dots connect. I don't know. Yeah. So stiff rump. I sort of like that one. Fun to say.
Don't be a stiff rump.
Right.
That reminds me of my cousin's small child. One time she asked him to do something. He said no. And she said, what'd you say to me? He says, I told you to go butt a stump. It's like, oh, man.
That sounds bad.
Go butt a stump, Mom. Go ram your head into a tree stump is what that means. So stiff rump. No, that's a totally new one to me. I've never heard that one.
There you go.
Very nice. I will use that. I will use that in my next conversation.
Okay. So also have I guess a bit of a curse word update. So way back in the early days of this podcast, episode 20, I told you about jizz scores. And so we chatted at length about sort of the regional nature of curse words and how asshole is prevalent here and bastard is prevalent there across the United States. So someone back in the day, 3 years ago, went back through and geocoded something like 10 million tweets for their source their IP address and then figure out which words are being used where. So I found there's sort of an update and basically a new approach to the same data crunched the same way. And so someone has gone back through and looked at the same information internationally and to figure out who cusses where and who. So this is maybe not quite as funny in as much as it doesn't tell us which curse words are the most popular and where. But this mostly comes to us from an article which I'll put in the show notes from from dig.com, digg.com, and I'll put some visuals in there. So think, think across the globe. Think of from a sort of cultural standpoint. What parts of the world do you think cuss more than others, if you had to guess?
I would say Great Britain and Australia, but that's just off the top of my head.
So, I mean, the first map I have here is a map of the world, and it kind of makes sense almost immediately. So, if you're in the Far East, Korea, China, Japan, that part of the world, they, because they culturally tend to be more reserved, more polite, very little cussing. Go to Africa, Uganda, Nigeria, Cameroon, again, about really about the same. It turns out there is certainly cussing in Australia, but cussing is really has it found its home in sort of Western Europe. It's definitely Scandinavian a little bit, UK, but good old the U.S.A. is is the land of the curse word. Um, so looking at this internationally, so across, per 1,000 tweets, 41.6 of those tweets in the US have some sort of profanity. In the UK, it's 28.6. In Australia, 26.6. And then most of the rest of the world, Canada 24.6. Most of the rest of the world is at those numbers or in the teens or lower. The US, leading the charge at nearly 42.
Oh,
Um,
God.
cuss words per thousand. So we are way out in front. Break this down.
USA, USA.
Break this down by state. Again, some of the stuff starts to make sense. California, fairly high. Florida, fairly high. 43.4 in Florida, 44.3 in Texas, 44.4 in California. Ohio is kind of weirdly high. The whole sort of western section, midsection of the U.S., New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, North Dakota, Minnesota, definitely lower. But there is one state and one city in particular that absolutely leads the charge more than any other. And this, I don't know whether this makes sense or not. You want to take a guess at what U.S. state has 50% more profanity than any other state?
I'm just going to throw it out here. Massachusetts, Boston.
See, that makes there's some logic to that. The answer is Maryland. Baltimore is by by a good margin the sweariest city in America, followed shortly by Baton Rouge, Atlanta, Detroit, Houston, Cleveland, Oakland, New Orleans, and Memphis. But Baltimore, Maryland, they at least on Twitter cuss like crazy. And seeing this story reminded me of, God, 12 years ago, 15 years ago. I have no idea why I was in Baltimore, but I went to I guess it's the Baltimore Aquarium. Maybe it's the Maryland State Aquarium that's in downtown Baltimore on the water, and was just cracking up laughing at this one guy who was walking around looking at exhibits, who every single time he saw something that surprised him or he thought was cool, he would say, "Look at that motherfucker! Look at that motherfucker!" Oh, and aquariums have, what do they have? Lots of children and older people. Look at that. He said "motherfucker" 10 times in 60 seconds. And like, so I thought I first found it funny. There's like a docent there that was like, "Sir, could you please quit? Could you please quit screaming motherfucker every single time you see a fish you like?" So anyway, according to this article, Baltimore is number one. So congrats, Baltimore, for your sweariness. You
There's not a chance. There's not a
motherfuckers.
chance. There's not a chance that he was looking at a fish called the big mouse North American
Right. I
motherfucker.
could
Was
be.
there?
I don't think so. He's like over and over and over again. So anyway,
How'd you catch that fish?
he's a feisty motherfucker. God dang it. Anyway, so moving on to tale number 2. So I guess you probably didn't realize that the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles was in fact a documentary. It's based very loosely on the tale of a man I'm about to talk to you about. We're going to talk about a Croat named Frane Selak, Frane. From Croatia, I have no idea how you would pronounce that. I'm going to assume it's Frane Selak. So, Frane, during the course of his life, had numerous, let's say, run-ins with various modes of transportation, starting pretty much from the get-go. He is born in 1929 in Dubrovnik in Croatia. His parents are out fishing. I assume they're in some sort of really, really small boat, hand-powered boat, a flat-bottomed rowboat or a canoe or something. Frane's mother goes into labor in the boat while fishing with her husband, and Frane is actually born in a boat in almost 100 years ago in 1929. From that point on, things start to, the details here are, let's just say they're cloudy, certainly colorful, and it's hard to know how much of this is true and how much has been exaggerated over time. But this story, if you Google this man's name, has been told in various venues over the years. But this is what he claims.
What was the name of the boat?
I don't know.
The SS Placenta? I mean, it's
Right.
bad luck to name a boat with a name that ends in A, though. So anyway, sorry, go ahead.
I christened the afterbirth. No. So that was his only, boat experience, I judged. But it starts to go downhill. So 1957, he is 27, 28 years old. He gets on a bus route he uses pretty commonly. He's on this bus so much he's gotten to know the bus driver pretty well. The man's named Ahmet, and while Ahmet drives this bus, he is pretty openly drinking liquor. It's a sort of a regional. It's basically a brandy, I think. It's a really fruity, sweet brandy called rakia that is usually like 90 or 100 proof brandy. And this guy drives the bus with a bottle of it between his legs. But he's, a friendly drunk, and he shares it and passes it, and so Frane sits up front and drinks the booze as well. But they're going down these mountain passes. The driver Ahmet loses control of the bus on a curvy mountain road, and bus crashes into a river. No one actually dies in this case, but both Frane and the driver manage to get out, and they swim to shore. And they're just sort of cut up and have some bruises, and mostly they're just irritated that their drinking has been interrupted. Just a few years later, 1962, Frane is on a train trip from Sarajevo back to Dubrovnik, his hometown. Sometime before the train is coming through this area, there's a small rock fall or a boulder or something came crashing down and banged up the track. So the train comes cruising along, jumps off the rails, and plunges into the Neretva River. And so, several cars are in the water. Selak has he's clever enough to rear back and, just basically stomps on the window closest to him and, basically kicks it out, breaks out the window of his coach, grabs the arm of the person he was traveling with. It was, just this acquaintance, manages to save his life. So they're in the river. They manage to get pulled out. This is winter in Croatia,
Oh, God.
so it's 30-degree water, whatever. He suffers one broken arm and has hypothermia. 17 of the passengers in this wreckage die in the river. Just the following year, unclear whether his arm is still in a cast or not from having been broken. Frane gets on a flight from Zagreb to Rijeka. He has to go back to, he wants to go visit his mother because his mother is sick. He's told by the airline that the flight is completely booked and he can't get on. he's trying to explain that it's a family emergency, and he's trying to convince them to please let me on, because of course, airlines are always completely reasonable when you have demands. I'm just trying to imagine, in 2024, telling pick at Southwest Airlines that I have to, it's urgent that I have to be somewhere now, even if the flight's full. I'll just sit in one of the toilets with the door open so I can stretch my legs. That's fine, right? No problem. Somehow he manages to convince them that this is fine, and so he winds up sitting in on one of the rear jump seats at the very back of the plane, and he's sharing this with a flight attendant named Rosika, and they're cruising along and basically making their close to making their final approach. There's some sort of malfunction, and they start 5 miles short of the runway, start dropping altitude quickly. Not quite in a nosedive, but they're losing altitude in a big hurry, at about 800 meters above the ground. The rear door is ripped off the plane. Neither one, somehow both Frane and the flight attendant he's sitting with, neither one of them are wearing seatbelts. And when this thing is in an almost nosedive, both of them get sucked out of the plane and are plunging to earth from 800 meters. One account says that the flight attendant survives. The other says that she does. Others say that she, died upon impact. But Frane claims that he lands on some hay and survives. The only reason this might be plausible, like I've read two other accounts of one during World War II of a British, soldier on a bomber who's shot down. He's thrown from the plane and basically crashes next to a barn and lands on a huge pile of hay and walks away because he lands on hay. So incredibly unlikely, but anyway, so he's sucked out of a plane and basically walks away. Sounds like crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but foregoing public transport doesn't really seem to help either. 1970, Frane is driving a car when it just spontaneously catches on fire. He manages to get out of the car and get to a safe distance before it reaches the fuel tank. The car explodes. 3 years later, another incident with a car. He's driving a malfunctioning fuel pump, manages to drop hot oil out of the engine, which ignite, and then flames basically shoot up through the air vents, which I don't think is even possible. But he manages to lose most of his hair, just gets singed. But I mean, besides losing his eyebrows, he's still fine. He manages to go more than 20 years. 1995, he's walking down a street. Decides he wants to cross the street. He's jaywalking. Maybe he looked the wrong way. I mean, Winston Churchill famously was hit by a car in New York City because he looked the wrong way crossing the street.
Mm-hmm.
So he steps out, is basically hit head on by a bus and is thrown down to the pavement. The bus stops. He stands back up and he's fine. He's just been hit full on by a bus.
The driver's his old buddy from Dubrovsk.
Right.
Frane!
By this point in his life, his friends and his family are eager to talk to him on the phone, and I'm sure they'll send him letters. But yeah, we don't really want to be around you. We're not going to spend time with you because it seems not smart. 1996, a UN truck, one of those box trucks you'll see on the news sometime when they're delivering aid.
Yeah.
Almost crashes into him on a mountain road. See, he's they're again windy mountain road. He swerves out of the way to avoid the head-on collision. Crashes the car into a guardrail. The guardrail, of course, like in a movie, slowly gives way. As the car creeps over the edge, he manages to leap out and catch on to this is like Bugs Bunny Coyote level stupidity.
And he's 70, right? He's pushing 70 at this point.
Right. Grabs onto some tree branch or some shrub just in time for the car to go falling down this ravine, dropping, whatever, several hundred feet into this ravine. And he would say later, of course, he wasn't wearing a seatbelt at the time because he never uses seatbelts because
Of course not.
not using a seatbelt is what saved his life in the airplane, right? Because seatbelts will kill you. Because, God. Anyway, so jumped out the car window, clung to the tree. He's basically fine. So there ends the portion of the story where vehicles and transportation try to kill this guy. Just shortly after he turns 73. In one account, it says he does this for the first time. In another account, he says he done this routinely. But he's 73 years old. He buys a lottery ticket, and he wins. 6.5 million kuna in local currency, which is I think right around $1.1 million in mid 90s. He buys a house in town. He buys a house at the beach. Basically starts giving away most of his money to friends and family. He bought a couple dozen cars to give away to people that needed vehicles. Basically, just hemorrhages cash until it's all gone. He lived until 2016, dying at the age of 86. Became a bit of a celebrity online because of this story, because it has been picked up over the years by the Guardian UK and the BBC and a few other places. There is on YouTube, on a channel called This and That Visuals, there is a short little animated feature that has been seen many, many millions of times in the last 10 years. This one video is seemingly the one take on his life that he didn't like because it came out 2 years before he died. Apparently, it's not very long, but apparently their summary of all the events that happened to him isn't very accurate. And for some reason, they gave him a mustache in the animated take, and he apparently never had a mustache one day in his life. It's like, come on, that's the easiest thing to get right. Anyway, dies essentially of natural causes at the age of 86. Most of this comes from Total Croatian News, but a little bit more from the BBC and from the Guardian. But a random tale of a man cursed by transportation.
And the cars he bought everybody were old Ford Pintos and 1995 Explorers.
And he named his daughter Volvo. No,
that's true story.
Allegedly a true story, but I mean, so the plane,
that's some crazy shit.
Yeah, I mean, so some of that might be true, but even in the 50s and 60s, a plane disaster where dozens of people died, there's going to be records of that. I think maybe not.
Oh God.
Anyway, still funny story.
Yeah, I would avoid traveling anywhere with that guy. I wouldn't meet him at the station.
We will meet you there.
I would put a picture of him up in every Lyft and Uber. And just do not take this man in your car.
Right.
That's crazy.
You'll be hit by a meteor today.
Born in a boat.
Yeah. So there you have it.
That's pretty awesome, Bryan. I've never heard of this guy before. And you have to make this into a movie at some point, right? I mean,
you'd think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with Rowan Atkinson as Mr. Bean, basically does the story.
Yes, he's entirely silent the entire time. That's crazy stuff, Bryan. Thank you very much. I'd not heard of that feller.
Yep.
Well, we have come to an exciting end to an exciting episode. We've had 2 stories, another curse word of the week, and an update on the old jizz scores. So not a lot of podcasts that can say that.
Very true.
Jizz scores.
Thanks for listening, folks. Please give us 5 stars on whichever platform you're listening to us on. Check us out at dreamidiots.com, on Facebook and Instagram at dreamidiots. Drop us a line, dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com. And we're also even on Patreon at dreamidiots. We're not yet on OnlyFans, but that's coming soon.
What? It is?
I'm sorry, what?
What?
The least followed OnlyFans page ever. But we appreciate you tagging along with us. And please, got a curse word, got a random story idea that you think's worth digging into. send it our way.
Our OnlyFans page would get prescribed as an emetic by a doctor. All right. Yes. Thank you, everybody, and be good to each other.
Bye.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong,
Mhm.
Bryan.
Bong bong?
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.